Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Stitch Sessions. This week we're diving into another holiday crochet project, and as you can see, we are going to be diving into a stocking, one of the most popular Christmas crochet projects. And the way we're going to work this particular stocking is we're actually going to start from the seam and work our way out across and over to the toes. It's going to be quite interesting, a little bit different than perhaps you've seen other crochet stockings done before. We also have other stocking tutorials, which we'll leave in the description box down below, so check that out. And if you happen to be new here, make sure to press that subscribe button so you never miss every time I upload a new video, which is every Wednesday morning. So without further ado, let's get all of our materials together and let's get stitching up our old-fashioned stitched stocking. Okay everyone, so here are all the materials you're going to need to create your old-fashioned stitch stocking, and I am so excited to dive into using these two skeins of yarn. Now, the main color we're going to be using for our larger stocking is this wonderful Lion Brand Wool Ease Thick and Quick yarn. Now, I saw this for the first time anyway, last winter, and I just fell in love with this color. And in case you're wondering, it is called Antique. And I didn't pick it up at the time because I thought, I don't know what I'm going to make with this. I had done plenty of scarves already last year, and it is quite thick. It's considered a bulky size 6. There's 340 grams or 194 meters in the skein. So I kind of hummed and I hawed and I hummed and I hawed, and I ended up leaving it. Then this year I knew I was going to do another stocking project, and they came back with this. And so I said, that's it. This year I'm going to grab this skein. And it was kind of sitting next to this luscious, glorious skein of yarn. Now, this is by Loops and Threads, and it's the fur yarn. Comes in 200 grams. And this is what we're going to use for our cuff. Now, when I did the mini version, I kept it super, super rustic with no cuff at all. So because we're working it up and down, and I wanted it to kind of keep that kind of rustic, old-fashioned stitched up look, this one did not have a cuff, but we are going to do one for this project, and this is what we're going to use for it. Just love, love, love the feel of it. And this is also considered a bulky size 6. And the only thing with these types of yarns, because this is polyester, is it says hand wash cold, dry flat, and don't dry clean. So if you're thinking about kind of throwing these kind of things in the wash, I would hand wash it or leave it to soak and then lay it flat to dry. So that is what we're going to be using for the cuff. You're not going to need much of it. And don't fret that you're going to have this big ball of yarn left. I have other things in store for this. And this one as well, you will go through a bit of this yarn. You won't use the whole skein. Again, it will depend on how large you'd like your stocking to be. Now, if you look at some of our other stocking tutorials, the one we did last year for 2019, we actually made it quite a generous size. So if you wanted to use this glorious yarn for that particular tutorial or that particular stocking design, you're more than welcome to do that, of course. So these are the yarns you're going to be using. Now, for the hook I'm using, here they are calling for, if I can see that, looks like a 9mm crochet hook. Now, for this project, I am actually using an 11.5mm hook, also known as a P or a size 16. I really kind of experimented with a little bit smaller, a little bit larger, and I like the feel of this sized hook, and I like the way the stitches came out. So I'm just going to kind of show you guys here. I've already got one of our panels done. So you can see that it just gives it a nice, generous stitch. It's not too tight and it's not too loose. So you've still got a nice thick fabric to work with, okay? So we're using the 11.5 millimeter hook. And of course, make sure you always have a trusty pair of scissors and a handy darning needle to sew in all of our ends, as well as to sew up our stocking later on, okay? So let's get started. Okay, so just to kind of go over the general procedure of how we're going to create our stocking. This design is done a little bit different than what we've done in the past. As I've described, we've got a tutorial where we start from the cuff and work our way down. We've got another stocking tutorial where we start from the toe and work our way up. This year we are working longitudinally, if that is a word. Basically, we're working up and down, and working our way across. We are going to be creating two of the exact same panel, and then we're going to sew them together. So as you can see, I've already created the first panel, and this will give you a basic idea of what it's going to look like. Now, it might look like knitting to you, right? But this is done using the most basic stitch. And especially if you are super duper brand new beginner, you can totally do this project, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start from the side, so you can see my little short tail here, and we are gonna create our initial chain, and then I'm gonna talk about how we created this knit look, okay? So first thing we wanna do is create a slip knot, okay? And place that on our hook, just like that, okay? And then what we want to do is, for this size that we're doing, so I would consider this an average to medium size stocking. Like I said, last year's was quite large. And then this little guy here, I would, I mean, I call it mini, but it's like mini I would consider like this. But I would consider this like a small sized stocking, great for like really, really small little things, or even just for decor, okay? So what we're gonna do is we are going to chain a total of 26. So that's gonna give us our initial spine for our stocking, okay? Now what you wanna remember is that anytime we start with our chains, you wanna be careful that you're not chaining too tightly, right? So you're just going to yarn over 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see I'm just keeping them kind of relaxed, not too loose, but not too tight. And I've got my 26 chains here, and it's nice and even. So once you've completed your 26 chains, what we want to do is we want to find the second chain from the hook. You never count the one on the hook. So we have 1, 2, and into this chain, you're going to slip stitch, okay? And this is basically the stitch we're going to use for this whole pattern pretty much, okay? Just like that. And now you're going to go into the next stitch, and you're going to insert and pull all the way through. Now I'm using quite a large hook, so sometimes it just takes me, right now the stitches are fairly loose, but sometimes I actually spend a lot of time kind of helping it through and all of that stuff. So if that is the case for you and you're finding it a little bit awkward, just remember to pack your patience and remember that we're doing this for fun and it should not be frustrating. So this is what you're going to do. You're going to slip stitch all the way to the end. So your work is going to look something like this, okay? And we've got the back there. Really simple. So go ahead and do that, and I'll meet you at the end of row 1. Okay, so I'm just at the end. I have my last stitch here, and I just wanted to go over what we're going to do at the very, very end. So right now, we've got 1 slip stitch into every single stitch, and in the very last one here of row 1, we're going to place 2 we're going to place 2 slip stitches. So we'll insert and pull through. Then you're going to reinsert into that same stitch there, and we're going to slip stitch again. So this is what we call an increase. but we're actually still going to have 26 stitches at the end of row 1. Remember, we chained 26 and then we went into the second chain. So that would have left one chain out. So we would have been down to 25 stitches. But because we did an extra one here, we still have 26 stitches. Now, we're always going to increase at this end. So what I would recommend is place a stitch marker on this side, or even the fact that this has your tail. The side that has your tail is always the side where we're going to increase. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So row 1 is complete. Let's move on to row 2. So for row 2, we're going to chain 1 and we're going to turn our work. Okay. And now we are going to find the second stitch. So you never count the loop on your hook, and we're not going to count that chain 1. So we're going to count 1 and 2. Into that second stitch, we are going to slip stitch. And this is where a lot of times it needs a little help to be pushed through. And then just slip stitch through. Okay. Now, sometimes this stuff happens, so I like to just take it out again and make sure that the stitches sit nice and even. I mean, it happens. It's not the end of the world if it gets a little loopy, but I like to make sure they sit nice and even. So we chain 1, and then we turn. I don't worry about that chain 1. Okay, so I skip the chain 1. I count 1, 2 into that second stitch. I will slip stitch. Okay, so you have something that looks like this. So you can see it's just starting to increase on that side, and it's going to be very gradual. And now we want to go into the back loops of all of the stitches that we did in row 1 for row 2. So for row 2, what you want to do is you just kind of want to turn your work a little bit here. This is the top, or these are the tops of the slip stitches. So we want to find our way into the top here so that we're working into the back loops only. So this is where usually I have to help it through, just like that. You really want to be careful with slip stitches. It's easy to really make them tight, and you can't afford to do that because there's such a flat stitch that if they're too tight, you're going to have an issue trying to get this big old hook through. Okay, so this is what we're going to do all the way to the end. Always inserting into the back loops only. And I will meet you when you've come to the end of row 2. Okay. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of row 2, and this is where it can get a little bit kind of weird as to where the end of our row is. So this is also why counting is really important. So I know that we had 26 stitches in the previous row, in row 1, and we didn't do any increasing in row 2. So we should have the same number of stitches. So I know that I have 23 stitches right now. So I've got one more. So I've got 24 stitches right now, and I know that there is one more stitch right here. So I'm just going to help that along. Slip stitch. And there's always going to be a loop at the end because of the chain 1 we did at the end of each row. Okay, so you're going to go into that, sorry, it would have been at the beginning of that row. So you just always want to make sure you get that one as well. You slip stitch, and we've now completed row 2. So it's kind of looking like a thick rope right about now, okay? Because of all the, we're basically slip stitching into loops. So don't fret as we build up our stocking, that will kind of even out a bit more. So remember that we're not working our stocking from the bottom up or the up down. We are working from the side or the spine, working our way out, and then we're going to create the the foot and the toe. Essentially, every time we increase, we're already creating a bit of the dip in the foot. So this is what gives it that kind of dropped foot, I guess we'd call it, dropped foot look. So what we were doing here is every time we came up to this end, we would increase a little bit more so that you'd get a few extra stitches on this end. And that's what gives it that look that it's kind of drooping down. Okay. So moving on to row 3. So for row 3 and every odd row, you will always chain 1, turn your work, or I guess that would have been at the end of every even row. And then you want to do the same thing we did previously here. We're going to skip 1, the chain and the first stitch here. We're going to go into the second one. And you're just going to slip stitch. Like this is all we're going to do. You just have to be cognizant of how you begin and end each of these rows. And so, like I said, for every odd numbered row, so this is row number 3, we will always just begin as usual. Chain 1 and into the second stitch. You just continue slip stitching all the way to the end. It's when we get to the end of row 3 that we have to do our increase. So go ahead and do all your slip stitches, and I'll meet you when you have 1 stitch left in row 3. Okay, I have this, what looks like the last stitch left, but remember, we have the full slip stitch and then we have that chain 1. So we got to keep that in mind. So this is actually my second last stitch here. And now at the end of every odd row is where we're going to place our increase, okay? So that's where I'm going to pick up this little chain 1 guy here. So I'm going to insert into there. And I'm going to do a slip stitch. But then I'm going to go back in to that same spot and I'm going to slip stitch again. So this is going to increase my number of stitches to 27. Okay, and be careful not to do that too tightly. Okay, so now I have 27 stitches at the end of row 3. And you should be seeing that it's starting to elongate here, which is exactly what we want. And I stretched that stitch out a bit too much. Okay, so we know our stitch marker is on this side or our tail, so we know this is the side where we're always increasing. Okay, so at the end of row 3, we have 27 stitches. So now we're going to go on to row 4, which is the same way you do every even row. You just chain 1 and turn. And what you're going to do is you are going to find the second stitch, which is right there. So remember, we ignore the chain 1, 1, 2, and we slip stitch. I just got to help that along there. So every even row, we're not really increasing at all because I didn't want the dip to be too dramatic. So we are just keeping the stitch count the same. So row 4, slip stitch all the way back to the top. Okay, so I've completed row 4 and I still have 27 stitches. So this is basically, you're going to repeat now. We're going into row 5, which is an odd numbered row. So you're going to now keep repeating row 3 and row 4, row 3 and row 4. So at the end of every odd numbered row, we always increase. We always place 2 slip stitches at the end. Every even row, we just keep the same stitch count. Every odd row, so this would be row 5. We're just going to chain 1 as usual. You'll turn. And remember, we skip that chain 1 and we count 1, 2 into that second stitch. We begin slip stitching. So all the rows always begin exactly the same. Okay, it's just for row 5, we're going to end with an increase at the very end. And remember, we have to do it in that very last loop right there. okay? And then row 6 would be an even number row. We chain 1, begin again, and no increases. So you're going to keep repeating rows 3 and 4 until you have a total of 20 rows. And this will give you the width of your stocking. So again, like I did with this one, we have a total of 20 rows across before we start doing our the toe part here, okay? So right now we're only ever dealing with increases on the bottom side here. So go ahead and do that, and then I'll meet back up with you when you've done your 20 rows. Okay, at the end of your 21st row, your work is looking something like this. So you can see this is where the foot is dropping down, okay? And you've got this beautiful knit woven look happening. So now we are going to start to form the foot part. So you would have still increased at the very end of row 21. So I haven't done that yet. I'm going to do that right now. Just need to add one more slip stitch. Nice and easy. Then we chain 1 and turn. And for row 22, we are going to begin forming the foot. So as we've done previously, you don't worry about the chain we've created. You skip 1 and into the second stitch, we will slip stitch. Then what we're going to do is we're going to slip stitch into the next 13 stitches, okay? So just as you've been doing before, just 1 slip stitch into each stitch, but we're only going to do it for another 13 stitches. And that was the 13th stitch. So now you should have a total of 15 stitches we've created. So including that chain 1 and the first slip stitch, plus the 13 additional, so we have 15 in total. What we're going to do now is create a decrease, and that's what's going to keep the top part of the foot kind of tilting down. So we are going to slip stitch the next 2 stitches together. So stitch 16 and 17 are going to be together. So that means we're going to insert our hook into the next stitch and pull up a loop, but don't resolve it just yet. We'll go into the next stitch and do the same thing. And this time we're going to take that loop and pull it through the other 2. And so hopefully you can see what that does is it stitches those 2 together. So this is also known as a slip stitch 2 together or a decrease stitch. So in total now you are going to have 16 stitches across, okay? So we're going to move on to row 23. So we will chain 1 and turn your work, okay? And so now what we're going to do is we're going to ignore that chain 1 and skip the first stitch here and go into the second stitch. Very similar to what we've done previously when we created the leg part of the stocking. Slip stitch. And you're just simply going to slip stitch into each stitch until you get to the end where we will do an increase again. I'm just doing my increase, so that is the 16th stitch, and now we're going to be adding a 17th stitch. Okay, so don't worry that there's a little bump there. That is normal. So at the end of row 23, you're going to have 17 stitches. We've created an increase. Now you're going to chain 1 and turn. And now you're just basically going to repeat what we did in row 22. So I always say ignore this chain 1. Whoops. Skip a stitch and then into the second stitch we slip stitch. So, you know, typical for what we've been doing on the increase side of the stocking. And now you're going to slip stitch all the way back across to our what I call the decrease side, and you're going to keep slip stitching until you've got 2 stitches left. Now remember that chain 1 will count as 1, So when I've got this one and this one left, that's where I'm going to stitch those two together. So go ahead and do your typical slip stitches. And when you've got these last two left, I'm going to meet back up with you just to refresh your memory on slip stitching two together. My goodness, that is a tongue twister. And here I am with 2 stitches left, okay? So I'm going to slip stitch these two together. So we are might be a little testy because they can be a little bit tighter. So just be patient. Sometimes what I do is I take a slightly smaller hook, like right here, and I just kind of use that to snuggle in there. Sometimes it's just a little easier. So I use a smaller hook to just kind of feed it through, just like that. So it's on my hook. And now I'm going to insert into that chain 1. Now that can get super tight sometimes. So again, I'm just going to use the other little hook just to kind of get it fed through. And now I'm going to slip stitch these two together. So this is stitch 16 and 17. So our stitch count for row 24 goes back down to 16 stitches, right? So we increased in the previous round, we increased in the previous row, but then in the following row, we decrease. So the stitch count will bounce back and forth a little bit. So at the end of row 24, we're back down to 16 stitches. So we're going to chain 1 and turn to go on to row 25. And so we'll kind of do this back and forth for a few more rounds, okay? So as always, ignore the chain 1, skip the first stitch, and go into the next stitch, which I think you can see I made that a little tight, so I'm just going to get in there and help it out. Oops, just like that. And then we're going to continue on. Whoops. So we're now into we're beginning row 25. So you can see that it's really dipping down a little bit there. So in the odd rows, we will increase at the end of the row. When we do even rows, we will decrease at the end of the row. So in our odd rows, like for example, this is row 25, we will increase the number of stitches. So we're going to go back up to 17 stitches. When we start an even row, we will end up decreasing a stitch. So we'll go back down to 16 stitches. So you are going to continue doing this. You're going to finish row 25. You're going to continue doing row 26, 27, 28, and 29. So at the end of your 29th row, you will not do an increase there, and I'm going to meet back up with you then. Okay, so end of row 25, you will increase, move up. End of row 26, you will decrease. Row 27, you will increase. Row 28, we decrease at the end. And row 29 is just a regular row with no increase. I'll meet you at the end of row 29. And just at the end of row 29, into my last stitch, where normally we would increase, we are not. Okay, so we're staying at 16 stitches here. And now you can see that it's starting to look like a stocking. So what you're going to do when you do the first panel, we're now going to do row 30, again with no increases. And we're just going to end up with our tail here. So I'm going to show you this one as an example. So I've already done my first panel, and I did 30 rows. And as you can see, I fastened off here and I left a long tail. So I'm doing that because I want to be able to use this tail to then stitch up the top part or the inside part of the stocking. For the second panel, we are actually going to do 31 stitches. So after I do row 30, sorry, I said stitches, I meant rows. After I do row 30, I'm actually going to come back down and do row 31 so that when I fasten off, I'm going to leave a long tail down at this end. And it's just, for me, it's a great way to kind of use your yarn wisely as opposed to snipping off, having to weave in 2 small ends and then cutting off a big piece to sew. So that is what I am doing. So for me, this is my second panel. If this is your first panel, you're going to do row 30 and fasten off, leaving a nice long tail. Okay? So go ahead and do that, and I will meet you at the end of my row. Okay guys, so I have finished what is my second panel. So I have 31 rows. So my work is looking like this, and I can really see it's taken on the shape of a stocking. So I am now going to fasten off. So I just want to make sure. So because this one I'm fastening off the bottom, I know I'm going to use this tail to stitch up underneath and up the back seam. So I just like to kind of trace it along here, and sometimes double it or even triple it, because some people think, oh, I'll just kind of trace it around here and that's enough. No, there's always some shrinkage when you stitch. So you always double, if not triple, the length around there, okay? And I'm actually going to triple mine because I actually want a little bit extra left over at the end to then chain up my little hanging loop here, okay? So I'm happy with that length. I'm going to snip off my yarn. And now I'm just going to pull that through and fasten off. Okay guys, this is the extra fun part. So I've done panel 1 and panel 2. And don't worry if like you kind of get them mixed up. You don't remember which one has 31 stitches, which one has 30. It doesn't actually really matter anymore. What matters is where your tails start and end so that you can sew your work together. And here's a little secret I'm going to let you in on. Chances are when you were slip stitching along here, maybe your stitch count at the end ended up being 15. Maybe it ended up being 18. It's not the end of the world, okay? So the main thing is that whatever count you did end up having, that the increases and decreases just stayed consistent, and that is what's going to create your shape, okay? And that's the cool thing about, that's kind of why I nicknamed it the old-fashioned stitch, because really, you know, handmade things do have a lot of quirky imperfections, and I think that's what makes them so beautiful and so special. So don't worry about any of that stuff at all. If you've got 2 panels that somewhat look like a stocking, then you are A-okay. And one other thing about creating 2s of anything, like if you've ever done booties or even mittens where you have to replicate the project twice, no matter how many people I've spoken to, no matter the experience level, every single crocheter and knitter has said the same thing. Your second one is never exactly the same size as the first one, even though you could have the exact same number of stitches and all of that and followed it to a T. It's just natural. I think what happens is as we get in the groove of making the first one, we either relax sometimes or sometimes we start to kind of tense up a little bit. And once we get into the second one, your stitches might be a little bit tighter, like your gauge can change. So again, not the end of the world. And this is a prime example. So when I did my first panel, you might notice that the edge of this one has kind of like this stretched out stitch here. And the reason why this first panel, the edge, see the edge of this one looks completely different. And that's because when I did my foundation chain row, instead of slip stitching right away, I did my first row of single crochets. And I was doing a little experimentation even with the mini one, just because I wanted a little bit of a ledge, so to speak, here to actually sew in that seam. You don't actually need it, okay? So if you're wondering why this one looks slightly different, that's why, but it is still the same number of rows. So again, slight differences. The other thing that I definitely noticed is, See, when I put this one against the other, look at that. It looks shorter. You think, well, I didn't do enough stitches. I actually did, but like I explained previously, I was getting in the groove of it, and my stitches just kind of, my gauge started getting a little bit tighter. And I did, when I did the single crochets here, it really stretched out my first foundation row. And so it just kind of stretched out the length of this one. So at the end of the day, not a huge deal. You're just going to stretch that out nicely. You could do a little bit of blocking. You want to be careful because this Thick and Quick does have a bit of wool in it. So it's 80% acrylic and 20% wool. So you always want to be careful with things with wool because they have a tendency of felting. So as long as you're just kind of, you know, soaking it and really laying it flat and stretching it, you should be okay. But in the sewing process, because I do have the same number of stitches, these stitches are all going to even out. So not to worry. And we're going to put that beautiful fur cuff. It's going to be amazing. So let's get stitching up our old-fashioned stocking. Okay, so once I've got that all organized, and I know this is going to be stretched out, it's going to be fine. What I'm going to do, because my tails are down at the end here, I am going to start by putting the bottom of the feet close to each other. Okay, so you have something that actually looks like that. Okay, and just to kind of make sure everything stays nice and even, what I'm going to do is where I had that tail before, and I'm going to just go into that fur or the last stitch there, and I'm just going to grab this tail here and pull it through. And this just reminds me that this is where the bottom of my feet end together for both of those, both of these panels, okay? And I might even just kind of feed it through one more time. It's not meant to be super permanent. It's just kind of meant to be a guide. This way I know relatively that these have to all stitch up together. And then this is the tail I'm going to use, right? The one that was at the toe. And then I'm going to start by kind of, now you're going to notice that this is bending out. That's a-okay. It was done on purpose. But you're going to start stitching these together. And it's going to look like it's going to buckle a bit. That is perfecto. We are totally cool with that. And then we are going to whip stitch the bottom here. Okay, it's just going to be much easier to kind of feed it in and out. So I'm going to show you what we're going to do right now. We want to grab our darning needle. Okay. And it's a little bit of a thicker yarn, so you just might need a little bit more patience to feed it through. Oh, that was actually pretty good. Okay, so once we've got that organized, now these for me, this is going to be, I've decided this is the wrong side facing out. So I'm just going to kind of pinch this in together just like that. And I'm going to start by finding the very first stitch on this side, which is right there. And I'm going to match it up with the first or the end stitch there. I just pull it through. Now, because these are the ends of rows here, it's just going to be a lot of eyeballing it. Okay, and you just want to pull it a little taut. And you just generally want to keep it nice and even. So I'm going to now find the next. So I'm going to go by the row. Okay, so I'm going to go right about there, insert, and then go into the corresponding row, which is right here. Okay, and then pull that through. Nice and easy. Just make sure it comes over. And again, I'm going to find the next visible row. Pull it through, and then find the next visible row on this side right there. Now you can also go in between the rows too if you really want to make it a little bit more snugly, which I think actually I shall do as well. So we pull that snugly. So next what I'll do is instead of going into the very next visible row, because remember we worked into the back loops, you see? So there actually is a row snuggled in there. I'll just kind of snuggle it in somewhere in between. And then find the in-between of this one right about there and bring it through. And that's it. And the beautiful thing about this is it's the same color yarn, it'll get nicely hidden. However, if you really want to create that cool stitched effect, like in this mini one, I made the 2 panels in 2 different colors. So you can kind of see a little bit where the stitching comes in, and that gives it that a little bit of that kind of vintage old-fashioned look. It's completely up to you, like how much you want to accentuate that vintage stitch styling. So completely up to you. Like maybe you would have wanted to do this stitching in white so that it stands out. If that's the look you're going for, you can totally do that. That's the beauty of this. You can create this in whichever way you desire that suits your taste. Okay, so I'm not going to bore you with the rest of this stitching here. I'm going to leave you to continue on. Make sure you kind of snuggle it up a little bit so it stays nice and secure. And so you're going to stitch it all the way until you get to right about there, and I'll meet up with you in that corner there. Okay, so I have come up to the heel here, and I'm just meeting up with that tail. What I'm going to do while I'm here is I'm just going to tie a knot or 2 to secure it. Okay, so your work looks a little something like this. It actually kind of looks like a funky sweater when you look at it. Okay, so this is the inside. So now if we were to fold this, just like that, so the outside now looks like that, which looks pretty cool. And that would now be the bottom end of the stocking. Okay, and it will stretch a little nicely like that. And now we've got the bottom of our stocking going there. And I know this part looks funny, but don't worry, we'll get to that. Okay, so you want to go back and fold it wrong side out. Now I will say you want this to be snug, but you do want to be careful you don't do it too tightly. But you also want to make sure that it's nice and sturdy for any items you have. Like, so this is a bulky yarn. It's pretty sturdy. So if you wanted to really fit something with a little bit of weight in there, I think it would be a-okay. Okay, so now we're going to go up the sides here. Where did my darning needle go? There it is. Okay, got all these tails hanging out here. Okay, so now it will be a little easier because we now have stitches to work into, and you should have the same number of stitches here as you did in each panel. So, okay, so yeah, they should each have 26 stitches going up and across. Now, don't worry again, if you only have 25 or if you have 27, not the end of the world, okay? So we just want to make sure that this end piece doesn't end up like that, okay? So that's why you want to make sure, give it a count, see where you're standing. Hopefully that you, like, even though I have the same number of stitches, remember this is stretched out. So as I stitch them and match them up, this will gradually come together. So now in my case, because this is just kind of like a chain row and this, I'm just going to work the, hopefully you guys can see that. Okay, so that's where I knotted it. So the very first stitch is really going to be right there. I'm going to dip down a little lower just to get a couple loops in there. And then I'm going to match it up to the very first stitch, which is right here. And I'm going to take this opportunity to use the full stitch, okay? So remember what I said about working up the side. I'm going to use that mattress stitch technique. So I use the whip stitch to kind of come up through the bottom. You can certainly keep doing the whip stitch. It's not a big deal, but I just decided that's what I want to do. So I'm going to feed it in towards me. Okay, we can just sew that in a little bit later on. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the very next stitch, and I'm just going to feed it from the front to the back, and I want to find the matching stitch. Okay, which is the last one I worked in. So it was that one. So I'm going to go into this one here. Okay, so it just takes a little bit of eyeballing as well. So I'm going to go in through here and back through there. And so now it's going out the back. Then in the next stitch, we come in through the back. So I've already worked this stitch. I'm going to go into the next one, match it up with the following stitch here, the one next to it, and come out the front. And it's as simple as that. So what happens is these two ends will butt up against each other, just like that, and then you just kind of pull it a little bit snug, okay? And then again, from the front to the back, find the next stitch, and you're gonna keep going. So, okay, and then it's gonna, you will have a little bit of a seam there. Now, what this stitch is good for too, is if you wanted the stitching to be more obvious and kept this on the outside, then this would look really cool. So you could have that ridge effect happening there. And who knows, I still might change my mind. The cool thing about this design, it is kind of reversible because this whip stitch, I mean, can look either way. So, you know, experiment with it. If you want to keep whip stitching, then go ahead and do that. If you wanted to change it up like I'm doing, go along. But at the end of the day, as long as you are attaching your pieces together and they're nice and secure, that's the main thing that matters. Okay, so I'm going to leave you to finish sewing up your side here. The main thing is to make sure that you're nice and even at the end. And if you've got, like, let's say you've got 2 extra stitches here, just simply go in to the last stitch, pick this one up. I'm just going to do this really quickly. Then come out the extra stitch and go back into that same stitch. So you see that already kind of bunches it down. And remember, we're going to do a fur cuff, so it will get hidden, okay? So don't panic on that. So I'm going to leave you guys now to sew in both of your sides. So finish up this back seam. And then what you're going to do is you're going to come back to this side, and you want to make sure that you start in a similar way. So the main thing is to begin with the first stitches exactly at the beginning, okay? And you're going to have this little opening here, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. And then just continue to sew up the end. Make sure that your dip here matches up, and then the rest should follow suit, okay? So finish sewing up your 2 sides, and then I'm going to talk about cinching up your toe. Okay, we are almost there. So I have sewn in both sides, and I did go ahead and decide to leave my seamed side facing out. So this was the first panel I did with the single crochets. I just kind of liked how it created this funky ridge here. And of course on the back it's a bit smoother because this was the second panel. But all in all, I'm very happy with how it came out. So we've got the opening of our toe, which we're going to dress in a second. And this this is leftover tail, and I just wanted to take you guys through. I'm just going to take a slightly smaller hook. This one is a 6.5 millimeter hook, and I want to create my hanging loop, okay? So when I got here, I just kind of knotted it a couple of times, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to reach in where this corner is here, and I'm just going to pull up this loop and chain. And I'm going to chain a total of 12. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's my 12, and it's okay if they're a little bit tighter because you want it to be fairly strong. And then I'm going to just, actually I'll chain one more and pull that through. Pull it nice and taut. So there's my loop, and you can make yours as long as you like. Like I found that 12 chains is plenty. And then I'm just basically going to go inside here, and you can do this with a darning needle, but sometimes I just like to keep it super simple. And I just want to pull in that tail there, just like that. Just make sure that that loop sits nice and snug, and I'm very happy with that. And then what I'm going to do is I will use my darning needle just to kind of weave it in a few times and then give it a little knot. And then we are ready to start talking about closing up our toe. Okay, so it is time to sew up our toe, and I have gone ahead and turned the stocking inside out. So you can see that the inside edging there, because I had that little extra lip, just gave it that extra little ridge there, which I decided to keep on the inside. So actually, I love how this stitch just creates such a beautiful stretchy. Love it. Okay, so now let's just get a bit of yarn here, maybe about 3 or 4 times the length. It's probably way more than we need, but I always like to have extra just to make sure. So I'm just gonna, you can basically start anywhere. I'll probably start right about here. So you're gonna insert your yarn, and I like to create a knot right at the very get-go. Now I am going to leave a little bit of a longer tail here. You'll see why in a moment. Okay, so I'm just going to knot that there. And now what we're going to do, we're not going to sew these two edges together because we want to create this little bunched up kind of rounded toe. So what we're doing is we're going to weave our yarn in and out along the edges, and then we're going to cinch it shut. Okay, so basically I'm just going to pick up some stitches here. I'm going to weave basically similar to how we were doing that mattress stitch, but we're just doing it along the edge here, out and then in, going out and then in. And this is what you're going to do all the way around. And okay, so it's getting lost there, but if I just cinch this in, see how it's kind of bunching? That's what we're going to do. So you're going to do that all the way around, and I'm going to meet back up with you once you come back to your original tail. Okay, so I've come back around to my tail, and now what I'm going to do, hopefully you can see it's already bunching in, I'm just going to take that long tail and just pull. Hopefully you can see it's all cinching in. Don't be afraid to pull really tight. See how it's closing in there? And because it's bulky yarn, it might not close perfectly just like that, okay? So, but what I'm going to do is I pull it as tight as I like, or as I can. I am now going to knot it with that other tail. Remember, I left it a little bit longer. So that way, as much as I could cinch it in, it stays nice and secure. So you can see now it's kind of created that nice rounded effect. And then all I'm going to do right now is I'm going to weave in this long tail a little bit longer to try and just close this gap a little bit. So I'm going to pick up some loops here. So I'm just going to try my best because it is pretty tight. And I'm just going to kind of go over to the other side and just pull this across. And see, it starts to cinch it shut. And then maybe I'm going to go over to the side here. And you're just basically picking up loops where you can. And I'm going to go crossways this way. Try to pick up some loops and pull it through. It's going to be a little bit taut. And whoops. And then I'm just going to pull it tight as well. Now be careful you don't pull so tight that you break your yarn, but see, you can see now that it's actually cinching in quite nicely. So I'm going to do this a few more times crossways just to make sure that that gap is cinched in nice and tightly. And that other tail is now getting in my way. Okay, so now you can see it's really closed off. So you might want to do that a couple more times. And then I am going to cut this off a little shorter and then just weave this tail in, weave that tail in, and then we are ready to do the final touch, which is our cuff. Okay, so go ahead and finish your toe, then turn it right side out, and I'll meet back up with you shortly. Okay, guys, this is what my stocking looks like. So you can see the toe is just got this cute little rounded shape there. That's what it looks like from the back. Okay, and if you want to, you can even put a little pom-pom here if you want to add an embellishment. If you're not that crazy about the sewn in look. Again, I am loving it because I'm going for the old-fashioned look. So I'm very happy with how this came out. I've got my loop, and now the moment I've been waiting for. we are going to dive into this beautiful fur yarn. And I can't remember if I had mentioned the color is actually called, if I can find it, soft pink. So this is the soft pink in the Loops and Threads fur yarn. You're only going to need a little bit of this. I will preface this with a little note to those of you that are really beginners. This yarn is probably pretty terrible for you to work with, only because once you start working with it, the fur or the fuzz really gets in the way. It's very challenging to see your stitches. So you have to get really acclimatized to feeling your stitches. Now we're only going to do a little bit of a trim, but it will require 2 rounds. So I just want to start off right away saying it is divine and lovely, but it takes a little bit of patience to work with this. If in the end it drives you crazy, then don't worry about it. I mean, this even looks great without a cuff, or you can just use an acrylic yarn and maybe do it in white and do it the same way we're going to do it. So it's not the end of the world. So, but in the meantime, I can't wait to dive in. So, where did I find it here? Is it in here? Oh, here we go. Can't wait. Okay, now this calls for a 10 millimeter hook, but I am just going to use my 6.5 millimeter hook, okay? And so I'm going to start right close to where I've got my hanging loop, and I'm just going to insert anywhere along the top. So we're basically working into the sides of rows, because remember we worked our work this way. And what's really cool about this ribbed look is we're basically going to work into a ribbed row and an inside row, a ribbed, an inside, up, down, up, down. So I call it an inside because it's the ridge on the inside, and then you've got the rib or the ridge on the outside. So outside, inside, outside, inside, okay? So you can start by creating a slip knot on your hook, and as you can see already, see how the hook gets buried? That's what's gonna make it challenging to find your stitches, okay? But it is doable. So here we go. With that slip knot on my hook, I'm going to insert my hook right about there, and I'm just going to slip stitch to join. And as you can see, you already can't tell where your loops are, but you've got to feel them out. Okay, and then I'm going to chain another 2. So I'm going to go 1 and 2. Okay, so we are going to use double crochet stitches to go all the way around for this first round. Okay, so I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to try and work over this tail as well. I'm just going to tuck it in behind here. And so next I'm going to insert my hook in between the ridges. So right about there, I'm going to pull up, whoops, see, it's very slippery. I'm going to pull up a loop. See? Can you tell how many loops I have? No, but you're going to feel it out. So I've got the 3 loops. Now I'm going to yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops. So you should have 2 loops left. So there I go. And then yarn over again and pull through the last 2. So it's your typical double crochet stitch. If you're still a little unfamiliar with it, I will leave a link in the description box down below for our basic double crochet tutorial, only because if you are new, learning with this yarn may be a little bit challenging, but I am assuming at this point, if you're watching this tutorial, that you've got a little bit of experience under your belt. So we're going to do that again, yarn over, and now I'm going to go into an actual ridge row so you can see where that V pops up. I'm going to go right through there, pull up a loop, and then yarn over. I'm going to pull through the first 2 loops, and you kind of just have to feel it out. And then when you've got 2 loops left, you know you're good. Yarn over and pull through the second 2. So that is what we're going to do for this round. Double crochets all the way around. You work into the ridge rows, and then you work in the dip rows, sometimes I call it. So there's a dip in between. So that's where I'm going next. So just find a good spot. Pull it up. pull through 2, and then yarn over and pull through the next 2. So, oh, I just love how that's coming out. Okay, guys, double crochet 1 into every single row, or, well, these are rows, right? The sides of rows. And I will meet you back when we come to the loop again. And just a little aside, in case you're wondering kind of what your stitch count should be, remember that we did 20 rows on each panel. So when you're working into each rib is every second row, right? So we've got 10 ribs and 10 dips, 10 ribs and 10 dips. So you're gonna have approximately 42 stitches, because when you come to the seams, you're probably gonna put 1 extra in here and 1 extra here. So give or take, again, it's not a huge deal because it's just, even if you do have a few extra stitches, it's just meant to look really loose and fluffy. But give or take, you should have about 42 stitches all together at the end of your round. But not the end of the world. You might have 40, you might have 44. But as long as you are happy with how it came out, we're A-okay. So I will meet you when you've done your first round of double crochets. Okay, guys, this is how it's coming out. Now, I do want to say that this is the second time I did it. When I worked into every ridge and every dip, I found that because the yarn is bulky, it started to really bow out, kind of like a very wide lip at the top, which actually didn't look bad. It just wasn't the look I was going for. So what I did is actually, I really only worked into the ridge rows. And what I did is I stitched 2 together so that at least it closed the gap. But you can do it any way you like. Like if you didn't mind that it bowed out, it actually did look kind of cool, but it just, for this project, was not the look I was going for. Just kind of really kind of dipped out that way. So just a little FYI, you might come across that. Now, we need to slip stitch to join, and this is where it's going to be fun and or funny, because we're like, where the heck do we slip stitch? You know what? You're just going to feel it out. I know that this is my chain 2 here, chain 3 I should say, and I'm just going to basically insert my hook somewhere in there and slip stitch, and ta-da, you've got it. I am so in love with how this came out. Okay, now if you want to leave your cuff just nice and simple and short like that, you are done. You are very good to go. You can snip off your yarn. Congratulations, you've completed your stocking. I am going to go ahead and do that second round, and if you want to follow along, this is what we're going to do, okay? And by the way, I know a few of you over the years, over the last few stocking tutorials I've done, have actually asked for the written pattern. And I do have on our Etsy shop, I do have the written pattern for the rosebud stocking I did about 2 Christmases ago. The written pattern for the mini version of this will also be in the shop. It will actually be in the shop, the mini version. I think this one is already in the Etsy shop. So just look for the old-fashioned stitched small stocking, and this one it will be up shortly. If it's not already up by the time that this video goes live, it will be up very, very shortly. So for those of you that enjoy a written pattern, you can find that on our Etsy shop, and our Etsy shop, of course, is Crochet Crafty Canada. All right, so for round 2 and the last round we're going to start by chaining 2. Okay, so a lot of times I'll chain 3, sometimes I'll chain 2. This is a bit fuzzy, so I'm only going to chain 2. And now I'm simply going to place 1 double crochet into the tops of all the double crochets I've done so far. And I'm kind of giggling because, again, it's going to be a lot of hit and miss, but you just kind of want to find your way around. If I turn my work a little bit, like you can kind of see there's a trail of stitches, but the fuzziness kind of covers it all. So you just want to do your best to feel your way through. That's why I love this yarn, but really is the best only for things like trims, because I don't know how on earth you'd be able to see or feel your way through that. Okay, so I'm going to yarn over, and my first stitch feels like it's about there. You might have to help it through. double crochet. So this is just going to give us a little bit of extra height. Now, by the way, if you are kind of getting fed up with finding the stitches, you can simply just go in between the stitches, which I think is what I'm going to do. And that actually just kind of keeps the fur snuggled in a little bit nicely. And then it saves you a whole bunch of issues with trying to figure out where is the stitch. And it's actually easier to see and feel where you just worked. So then I'm just going to find the next little opening there. And so you see, it just gives it that extra little bit of height. Yeah, I like that. It just kind of gives it a bit more of a, because it is a chunky yarn and it just kind of feels a little bit more hardy. I just wanted the cuff to really match in style. So that's it, that's all. You're just going to finish this round with a double crochet into each stitch or in between each stitch. And you have completed your old-fashioned stocking. I'm so excited for you guys as well as for myself. I am so in love with this color and the yarn I used. Super, super excited. Remember, if you haven't pressed that subscribe button already, what are you waiting for? Come on board. Come and hang out with me every Wednesday morning. I upload a new tutorial, and I've always got some different projects we've got on the go. Anywho, okay, so make sure you do that, and I'm going to meet back up with you shortly. Okay, guys, this is it, the moment of truth. We're going to slip stitch to join somewhere in this madness here. You're going to insert your hook, pull it through, chain one. Now we're going to snip our yarn. And we are done. So you're going to pull that all the way through, give it a good little knot. And then you're going to sew in this end. I'm going to hide it in there for now. And guys, we did it! We did our cuff, and I am so loving how it looks. Now, if you want to make a really thick cuff and then even fold it down, you could certainly do that. I just found for the length, I found that this proportion worked really, really nice. I just love, love, love it. And it's got lots of stretch to it. This is the beautiful thing about doing a ribbed stitching like this. Lots of stretch so you can place a lot of fun little goodies in here. Or you can just leave it as is and use it for fantastic holiday decor. I am so thrilled with how this came out. I hope that you guys have enjoyed working on this project. I've been in love with the yarn, the colorway, all of that stuff, and I hope you've had some fun with this too. And hopefully this has given you enough time to get a head start on some of your holiday crochet projects. And remember to tag me on Instagram. You can find me at The Stitch Sessions, and there's an underscore between the words. And a few of you have tagged me on some of the projects that you made in your own colorways, and I love seeing that. I'm always kind of thinking and designing, and I love to see how you interpret some of my designs. So please do come on over, pop in, say hello. We're also on Facebook at The Stitch Sessions, and visit me on our website, which is crochetcrafty.com. We've got a monthly newsletter where we always give away one free written pattern every month. And we also offer an interactive online crochet class. We do them in 4-week stints. And we always have a different type of project that we work on. And what's really cool about the class, as opposed to watching it on YouTube videos, is that it is live. So you can actually lift your work up. You can show me what you've got going on. If you're not quite sure what's happening, I can have a look and let you know and be able to guide you a little bit better. And of course, the wonderful thing about the YouTube videos is that you can pause anytime you like and take your time and work on the project. So we've got a bunch of different ways that you can work on your projects, learn your craft, hone your skill, all of that fun stuff. So guys, have an amazing day. I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Take good care. Happy crocheting, and I'll see you guys in the next session.